afternoon, and welcome to today's session. There is a new chapter that I want us to start looking at and develop a concept on it. So the chapter is membranes, proteins, DNA, and gene expression. So I know that some bit of it we have been understanding in the previous lessons, but I want us to develop into details much about this. So I want us to start from the membranes and the transport. So membrane, we have learned about the structure of living organisms, and we have known some of the membranes that exist within the organism. So the first one that I want us to look at is the membranes that we have in the microorganism, the unicellular organism. Like I want us to start looking at the organism that is called amoeba proteus. Now this is an organism in the kingdom Protoctista. It basically lives in water, and we know that there is movement of particles from different regions. So this particular organism has got a membrane that separates it from its surrounding. That is the internal content and the surrounding, and in this case the surrounding is the water, the fresh water, where it lives in. So we know very well that these organisms, with the water existing around it, there is some movement between the surrounding, the molecules on the surrounding, and the internal parts of these organisms. So these movements are basically, we have got passive movements that rely on processes like diffusion. We also have got movements that rely on osmosis. These are some passive movements. Though we also have got the active movements that depend on the active transport. So these are the movement that happens across the membrane. So this organism has got a membrane. Now we know that this movement can be of use to the organism, or they can bring in some trouble to the organism. Like for example, we have got this passive movement that is osmosis. This movement involves the water molecule. So in the event that the water molecules get into this organism, it can be too much that can exceed the stretching level of that membrane. Therefore, it can burst out. So how do this particular organism become safe with this particular movement? So inside this organism, there are other membranes. Those are the membranes of the organelles that it has. So it has got a structure called contractile vacuole. Contractile vacuole. So this one here is another membranous structure that is found in this organism. What happens in this particular structure is that whenever this organism has got water moving in it, this particular vacuole here can get filled with that particular water. And in the event that it is full with water, it can start vibrating and moving towards the membrane that separates the internal structure and the outer molecules with this organism. That is the cell membrane of the organism, and then it will release the excess molecules. So by that, this particular structure is becoming of use, and this is one of the membranes that we want to talk about among very many membranes. So we see that in every transport that we have, there is this membrane that must regulate things that are getting in and things that are getting out. And then there are also processes that are involved, the physiological process that is going to help in moving various molecules. Like we have seen in the case of water, we are going to see in the case of the gaseous molecules that can move in and out, because these particular organisms need these materials to get in. They also need the materials to get out. Apart from this, we also have got the ions that are required for various cellular respiration processes. And these particular ions must be taken from the surrounding. And therefore, in this case, they will not be moving in passively. They are going to be forced in. And in the process, we are going to rely on the active transport here, which is a process that uses energy from a molecule that we have learned earlier called adenosine triphosphate. That is ATP. So this molecule will be the one that is providing the energy so that the molecules that are needed in the cell can be getting the energy to move in and get out of the cell. So that is what we have at the very beginning of the cell. So this is one of the organisms that we are supposed to be looking at in this chapter. Now there are some more skills that we're going to develop in this particular chapter. Some of them are mathematical, like we have to know the units that we are going to deal with and some of the equations that we are going to write in this particular chapter. So these are an overview of what is happening in this particular membrane. So I want us to now move on to the first thing that we should be therefore understanding, the membranes in a cell. That is now the next thing that we want to understand, the membranes in a cell. So we have looked at the cell, and this cell is from a unicellular organism. So I want us to look at the normal cells that we have talked about from the upper organisms. So we want to see the membranes within the cell or in a cell. And when we talk about cells, I mean the cells of the more developed organisms like the plants and the animal cells. Now, looking at what I have written here, I'm talking about membranes. Normally from our lower level of learning, we talked about the cell membrane, which looks like one membrane. But I want us to remember that the cell has got structures in it. We have got structures like nucleus, we have got structures like mitochondrion, we have got some like the chloroplast in the plant cell. So those are cells that those are the structures inside the cell. Now these structures are membrane bound. And remember, we talked about the eukaryotic organism, the organisms that have got the nucleus and their nucleus is membrane bound. So at that point, we are talking about another membrane. So this one bringing the plural of membrane. So we have got the membranes that are found in the organelles in the cell itself, and then we have got the cell membrane that forms the surface that separates the surrounding and the internal content of this particular organisms that we want to look at. So what should we know about these particular membranes that we are talking about? These membranes are very important. The first membrane that we are talking about is the surface membrane of the cell. Its first role is separating the molecules, and therefore it regulates what is getting in and what is getting out. Now if we look at the other membranes, like for example, if we take the membrane of the mitochondrion, this one here is an organelle inside a cell. We really know the work of this particular membrane. This is the organelle that forms site for respiration. So we can say that it is a site of respiration. This is an idea that you already have. But look at it into details. When we talk about its forming site for respiration. Now, respiration normally occurs on the membrane of the mitochondrion. So you see that is giving us another work of the membrane, forming site of chemical reaction, or what is called the cellular respiration for this particular matter. So that is another work of the membrane. And then for this particular reaction to take place, or this particular process to take place, we know that we need these other molecules called enzymes. These are molecules that we need. Then the next question that we ask ourselves, where are they? Now these enzymes are on surface membrane again, surface membrane. That is where they are attached. So apart from forming site for the reaction, they also form site for attachment of other proteinous molecules, like we are seeing the enzymes that are found on the membrane. So those are the work of the membrane. Apart from the regulating, we also have got the reactions that can take place in them, and also the attachment of molecules, like an example of enzyme, which is a proteinous molecule. So those are some of the works that we have in the membrane. And then when the membrane separates the molecules that are inside the cell and outside the cell, it creates difference in the conditions that we have. So it can separate the two conditions that we have. There is that internal condition, it is different from the external condition. So it can create for us two different conditions that exist within an organism. So those are the works of the membrane. Now, I want us to look at how is the structure of the membrane, the structure of membranes. I know very well that some of this has been mentioned in our early level of learning, and we know that the cell membrane, as we learned it earlier, has got majorly two things. One, it is made up of lipids. Then we also have got the protein layer. Now this lipid is attached to phosphate, so we can call it the phospholipid layer. So these are the things that forms the cell membrane. Now I want us to look at into the details when we talk about the phospholipid layer and the protein layer and what each does for us. Now I want to remind you of the lipids, how it is. Now a molecule of lipid has got two building blocks in it. We have got what is called the glycerol. So if I can draw it for you here, we can have glycerol. So this is a molecule. So suppose this is a structure. That is one part of the lipids. Then it is always attached to the molecules of the fatty acid. So this one can be my fatty acids attached to this particular membrane. So this one is glycerol. These molecules here are fatty acid. So that is one component of the membrane. And then these two here are attached to the phosphate group here. So we can say that the glycerol end of the lipid is attached to what we are calling the phosphate group. So this is one component of a cell membrane, which we are seeing here clearly. We have got the phospholipid layer. And why are we calling it phospholipid layer? It has got the lipid itself is attached to a phosphate group, and that is why it is forming the phospholipid layer. And it has got two ends that we can clearly see. We have got one end of it is forming the fatty acids, and the other end is the phosphate lipids here. So that is what we have in terms of the structure. Now, if we want to understand what this particular phospholipid layer is doing for us, it is forming two ends, and therefore we are going to call it a bilayer. So it is going to give us two layers in it. So I want us in the structure of the membrane, I want us to understand the phospholipid bilayer. And I have said that this is a layer that is having phosphate attached to lipid. That's why we are calling the phospholipid. And it is a bilayer because we can see that it can have got two ends in it. So we are forming the two portion that is coming out of it. Now from this particular portion here, one portion is polar. It has got one polar end. It has got one polar end. Now this one means that it can allow molecules of specific identity to pass across it. And this one is like, for example, when we look at it keenly, this particular phosphate group here can easily dissolve in water. So the phosphate end, phosphate end here can dissolve in water. That end of the membrane can dissolve in water, and therefore it is hydrophilic. Therefore this end can be called hydrophilic. This means water loving. It can easily dissolve in water. And then the other end, that is the lipid end that hangs the phosphate acids down here, cannot dissolve in water, and therefore it is not water loving, it is water hating. So with that particular end, the fatty acid end is referred to as hydrophobic. Hydrophobic means water hating. So that is what this particular portion of the membrane is giving us, that we are seeing clearly. So in terms of the phospholipid layer, we are getting two things that are coming out here. It has got two ends. The polar end that can easily dissolve in water, and therefore it is given a name hydrophilic. That one means that it is water loving. And then the fatty acid layer end is not dissolving in water, and it is giving us what we are calling hydrophobic, which means water heating. So that is how it is. So if any case it is on the surface of the water, remember water we need to talk about, you have talked about it earlier, and it is a medium of transport here. So if this particular membrane is on the surface of water, how does it behave? Now in the water, it is going to, suppose this is a surface of water and we have got the molecule of the membrane. This is what is going to be seen. We are going to see that the polar end will be dissolving in water like I am indicating here, and then the other end here, this is the fatty acid layer end, will be hanging out of water. So it is giving us a monolayer that we can see. That this one here is the hydrophilic end that is dissolving in water, hydrophilic end. So this is an aqueous solution, meaning this is water. So this one here is air outside, so it is giving us a monolayer. Air here, this part is hanging out, and this is the hydrophobic. This is the layer that is hanging on the air, so it doesn't like water. So if we have it arranged, we can see that we can have several layers that is forming for us a monolayer on air in this particular manner. So this is what the membrane will be like. There is that end in water and the other end that is hanging on air. So that is what I want us to do.